Either way, I think it'll be important to just maybe take a glimpse at what Putin says on Victory Day. Granted, we can get access to it. I'm sure we will. But we have to remember that last time, or well, he's had a few speeches since, but we have learned a lot about what's on his mind from some of his last speeches, right? Like, I think it was the day before he finally launched the invasion into Ukraine. He had that just grievance ladled speech about just oh, denazification, there is no Ukraine. We learned a lot from these crazy speeches, so there's a chance we will learn more on Victory Day. Side note, and I'm joking, I'm kidding, so don't take it seriously, but I would love a Victory Day's speech keynote speaker to be Marjorie Taylor Greene or Tucker Carlson. Like they're willing to go to Viktor Orban, right? I mean, Putin's just kind of a little more intense version of Viktor Orban. But no, I would love it if Marjorie Taylor Greene's up there with Putin talking about, masculinity and cancel culture and, men aren't men and women aren't women anymore. I think that would be a good full circle. I kid. But moving on, I do want to talk about Moldova a little bit here and its relationship with Russia. Because honestly, you can't really talk about what's happening in Donbas or Donetsk or Crimea without also kind of thinking that there's a very similar situation that could unfold in moments' notice, really, in Moldova. So I will start with a portion of a UN article from the UN Dispatch, which is kind of like a news and discussion paper for the UN. And the article reads that, in quotes here, of all the countries that border Ukraine, Moldova is arguably the most vulnerable to Russian aggression. Since 1992, Russian troops have been present in a breakaway region of Moldova called Transnistria. This is a majority Russian-speaking region that receives considerable support from Moscow. End quotes. And now this is why, coming back to the conversation here, is because in late April, there were actually a series of explosions in Transnistria, and they haven't actually proven the culprit yet, but it set off a pretext for escalating forces in the region. It's also caused escalation in rhetoric from Russia. And a lot of people either think the culprit is the Moldovan separatist government along with Russian aid. So, you see the UN worrying here. You've seen Russian rhetoric. There was a picture of Belarusian forces also recording a video. And behind them in the video, there's clearly like a map of Moldova with kind of the military strategic arrows and a visual of that region. So there's a lot of speculation, and it doesn't help when there's explosions in the region and a lot of Moldovan government officials think it could have been at least Russian linked. And before we go into the background of this, I will just reiterate that this is a fairly similar looking situation from the outside. You have a region of Moldova, Transnistria, that identifies with Russian culture, ethnicity, and also does not agree with the maybe closer Romanian ties that Moldova also has. And it's been waging a conflict that wants separation, right? There's obviously some allegiance towards Russia there. And it's a lot like I said, like Eastern Ukraine. And that's why I think if Putin were to expand or escalate, it wouldn't be first to like Finland or Estonia. It would be first in Moldova. It's closer and it has people that support Russian and the Russian regime and do not want to be part of Moldova. So it just seems like an easy fix. I think somewhere like Poland or Estonia, it just doesn't have that same connection. And as I mentioned earlier in the program here, is Putin seems to have this, Christian Slavic nationalism, kind of this savior complex, basically, he has in regards to, ridding the Nazis from Ukraine and saving Russians everywhere. And, that language he used about saving Russians everywhere, it applies to Moldova too, right? So whatever he said about Ukraine, the same is true about Moldova. And that's why it is kind of troubling. I watched a great video earlier, and they interviewed the former deputy foreign minister of Moldova. And I'll play a little bit of it because his explanation is good, and it kind of goes off of what we're saying here. And I think it's just good to hear from a Moldovan in the area who is speculating about what could happen.
As Julian Grosser, who used to be the country's deputy foreign minister.
These are a series of types of provocations which basically have the main objective to incite, to spread panic, to destabilize the region, because Russia, Kremlin, and special forces would like to have a more loyal administration in the Transnistria region that would follow the orders, whatever the orders they can have in the war that they have on Ukraine now.
It's not clear if Transnistria will be dragged into Russia's war with Ukraine. But for her part, Valentina Tomasz hopes peace will prevail for the sake of the children.
And now to go even further with this, the European Council on Foreign Relations, which puts out some great work, by the way, seems to agree with me on why Putin would make Moldova or the Transnistria region his next target. The article from the Council notes here in quotes, on the 22nd of April, the deputy commander of Russia's Central Military District outlined the aim of the second phase of the country's war on Ukraine. The goal was not only to take the Donbas region in the country's east, but also to seize control of the southern coast of Ukraine and to link up with the Moldovan breakaway republic of Transnistria. Now, something interesting I would note here, too, is that the timing of this plan that was leaked from the Russian military district, it does line up quite well with when those explosions were heard in Transnistria. Also, to go further, the European Council on Foreign Relations notes that days later, these attacks on uninhabited and unimportant military targets in Transnistria basically provided the pretext for the separatist authorities to order a mobilization and to tighten security measures. And this, again, also sounds like what happened in Ukraine, where, there's some attack in the east, and Putin's like, okay, there's our pretext to do something here, to escalate. And, lots of questions come to my mind is like, why would there be attacks on uninhabited or unimportant military targets, unless it's by the Russians or the separatists to give a pretext for doing something more? I would also add that this plan that was outlined, moving across the coast and basically creating a land bridge or a bridge between, Moldova and Ukraine and unifying all these territories. My instinct would be to say that it's a little bit grandiose, considering the Russians really can't do much in Ukraine, and now they want to make this a multinational conflict and try to unify multinational separatist groups. It's really bold for a military that seems corrupt, depleted, and breaking down. But they did say it, so it's clearly in their agenda. And I'm sure if they had more success in Ukraine, especially in more the west and the north, maybe there would be actually more serious worries here. But I think it's still important to talk about, right? And so this to me sounds like, again, like I said, pretext for something. Again, I just don't know if they could actually carry this out. Also, the article poses the questions as to why Russia would want to do this. And, well, other than, this kind of savior complex they have. But apparently, and this is something that would be a little bit worrying, is that the combined Russian and separatist military groups in Transnistria actually could outgun the standing Moldovan forces. Now, I don't think this would be big enough of a force to take on the Western-backed Ukrainian forces by any means, but it would definitely destabilize Moldova. And if you guys are not aware, Moldova is already not one of the more stable places. So there's a lot of issues here, and they could definitely cause chaos, which, again, is not what we need right now. And this article even notes that, kind of like what I touched on, is that Moldova seems like a bad decision for Russia because they would need to cross rivers and bridges, and the army is quite literally stuck in Ukraine. So, again, lots of question marks here. Now, I'll also go back to kind of highlight why this matters, because you're like, okay, so Putin wants Ukraine. But I mean, Moldova. But I think it's also important to understand why he wants Moldova. So modern Moldova is quite new, like a lot of these former Soviet states. The country has had borders that have changed for ages. You had Russian, Ottoman, even Austro-Hungarian empires that have left their imprints on the region. And since these eras, it's been many things. There's a great article from the Carnegie Endowment on International Peace, and it discusses in quotes here how today's Moldova is the successor state to the Moldovan Soviet Socialist Republic. Really flows off the tongue. And it was one of these constituent republics of the Soviet Union. It was a product of this Soviet ethnopolitical administrative experimentation, which included the Moldovan autonomy within the Ukrainian Soviet National Socialist Republic, and that was in the 1920s and 30s. You have kind of this almost created quasi-state that was also combined with Ukraine for periods of it. The entity was transformed into the Moldovan Soviet Socialist Republic after some of Stalin's land grabs of Romania following that Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. And then there were also post-World War II arrangements in Eastern Europe. And so you can see, that's, I think, why Moldova is even sometimes more fascinating than Ukraine, is because it has like an ethnic Moldovan population. It has also ties with Romania, and it also has ties with Russia. So you have like lots of things going on here. And something else that's interesting that the article notes is that the Soviet era caused the country to basically see many ethnicities and groups kind of move in and out. Land grabs were almost sometimes forced to go there. We had annexation of land. And the article notes that this really led to a very divided country to this day. It says in quotes here that Russians and Ukrainians moved into the newly Soviet Moldova, in addition to those who had resided on the right bank of the Dniester River prior to the formation of the Moldovan Soviet or Socialist Republic. And the result was a country with borders that would be challenged as soon as the imperial bonds fell off, and a divided population whose counterparts were eager to preserve ties to their historical homelands, end quotes. And I think that's a key here, is you have multiple different ties here. And it gets really complicated when you think about, what could happen in the future. And a little more is that, since the fall of the Soviet Union, much like Ukraine, I think that transition, that post-Soviet era transition towards either open society or market economy, etc., it seemed difficult, to be fair. Much like Ukraine, rising nationalism, separatism in different parts, and division over kind of the future, a lot of corruption as well, ties with Russia, pretty similar in that. And going into Transnistria for a second, about 30% of Transnistria is Moldovan, like ethnic Moldovan, while the rest does seem to be mainly consistent of ethnic Russians. This is a region that did not also support closer ties with Romania, so there's clearly a very pro-Russian stance there. And that Carnegie article from earlier notes that the population of Transnistria is about 500,000. I've also seen 400,000, so let's say 450. And Transnistria was the largest of the unrecognized separatist states, apparently. And this is interesting. Yeah, it was the largest of these unrecognized separatist movements in the former Soviet Union in its entirety, until the conflict in eastern Ukraine that began in 2014. And that is why I bring this up here, is because I think since the Crimean War in 2014, Russia may start, or has started, considering what other places with ethnic Russians may be like, right? And so they focused on eastern Ukraine, but it would not be insane to say they start focusing also on Transnistria. Now, taking us back to the current situation, things are getting difficult also in Moldova on kind of an international relations scale, because there's an article from today, actually, May 6th, from Newsweek, that discusses how Moldova's president of parliament, Igor Grosu, told Ukraine's speaker of parliament that military assistance would not be provided, and they were going to slow down giving, any arms, even defensive weapons, which can also be offensive, right? And apparently a lot of people are speculating that this is because the Moldovan government doesn't want to piss off Putin, basically. And I think it should be noted as well that they have given humanitarian aid, millions of euros of humanitarian aid to Ukraine, and they have sent out their support for Ukraine. So the Moldovan government is not like some crony of Putin, but they also understand their problem, is that there's a huge separatist movement, and also Russia probably would like to help them if they could. So I don't blame them at all. And it's going to be interesting to see, because I think in the weeks ahead, especially maybe after Victory Day, as I mentioned, we will see if Putin tries to take a false victory or not. But I do not think it's likely that he's going to, invade Moldova now. But I think it just depends on whether his goals are in the Donbas region, or if he has goals of grandeur where he may want to take more. Now, the European Council on Foreign Relations does argue that the EU should help fund border protection on the Moldovan border, and should also move NATO-enhanced foreign presence units in, I guess, close to the Romanian-Moldovan border. And if the situation worsens, Moldova could then invite these forces to undertake maneuvers on its own territory. It's so complicated, right? And I think it just shows us how complex the history of this region is, and how almost simple and stupid Putin's actions are to think that he seems to understand all of it as being part of Russia. Shared culture and shared ethnicity doesn't particularly mean that he gets to define what that means. You know what I mean? I would also say, though, I think this shows us that if Putin wants to make this a bigger deal, it could make this a very complicated, risky situation because this could quickly spew out of Ukraine's borders into Moldova. That's where I would be looking for things to escalate. I just think it would be the most sensible, and there's not a lot of focus on it either. Again, I mean, just based on what I'm seeing about every day in the news, I don't know if the Russians really have the ability to go much further. And even if Putin wanted to escalate, and especially if he makes a speech about it on Monday, it would take months to actually get more troops and enlistees. But this seems to be kind of a common trend in these late-stage authoritarian regimes, is that you almost need to kind of create a society, a militaristic society of distrust. And so maybe that's what Putin's trying to do. I can't pretend to know what this guy's up to, but Moldova is something to watch. The Victory Day speech is something to watch. So many moving pieces here. But with that, I will end it for this episode. I want to thank you guys for listening. As always, have a great weekend. Stay safe and sane. I'm here watching it rain. I hope it goes away so I can, maybe enjoy some sun. Went on a run today and got soaked as usual. So, hopefully the weekend will be a little bit better. Hope you guys have a good weekend as well. Take care.